There is a town in New York called Dobbs Ferry. It's a quiet, comfortable suburb where the streets are lined with oak trees, where kids ride bicycles after school, and where life moves at a steady, unhurried pace. It was here, on May 14, 1984, that a boy was born who would one day change the way every single human being on Earth connects with one another. His name was Mark Elliott Zuckerberg. Mark was the second of 4 children born to Edward Zuckerberg, a dentist, and Karen, a psychiatrist. The Zuckerbergs were a close-knit, intellectual family. Dinner table conversations were not about sports scores or TV shows. They were about ideas, science, philosophy, and the world. From the very beginning, Mark was different. While other children played outside, little Mark was taking apart electronics, asking questions no 5-year-old should be able to formulate, and showing a fascination with how things worked. Not just on the surface, but deep inside, at the logical, coded level. His struggle was not the struggle of survival, it was the struggle of purpose. And in many ways, that is a harder battle to fight, because the world does not always recognize or reward minds that are simply built differently. Childhood and education. By the time Mark was in middle school, something remarkable was already clear. He had a gift, not for music, not for athletics, but for programming. His father recognized this early and hired a software developer named David Newman to tutor Mark privately. Newman, who would later describe young Mark as a prodigy, found that teaching him was nearly impossible, not because Mark couldn't understand, but because Mark already understood and wanted to go further. At around age 12, Mark built his first software program. He called it ZuckNet, a simple messaging system that allowed computers in his father's dental office to communicate with each other, and for the family at home to be notified when a patient arrived. Today, you might call it a primitive internal messaging app. In 1996, it was nothing short of extraordinary for a 12-year-old. At Phillips Exeter Academy, one of the most elite prep schools in the country, he built another program, a music player called Synapse Media Player, which used artificial intelligence to learn a listener's preferences and suggest songs. Microsoft and AOL reportedly offered to buy it and hire Mark. He was 17 years old. He turned them down. He didn't want to sell something, he wanted to build something that would last. First struggles and failures. In 2002, Mark enrolled at Harvard University, but brilliance does not protect you from mistakes, and Mark made some significant ones. In his sophomore year, he launched a website called FaceMash. The concept was simple and deeply problematic. It pulled photos of Harvard students from the university's directories and asked users to vote on who was more attractive. Within hours, FaceMash crashed Harvard's servers. Within days, Mark was hauled before the university's administrative board, facing charges of violating privacy policies and breaching security systems. The backlash was fierce. Female students were outraged. Student groups protested. The press got hold of the story. Mark narrowly escaped expulsion. The charges were eventually dropped, but the damage to his reputation was real. Around the same period, he was approached by 3 fellow Harvard students, Divya Narendra and the Winklevoss twins, who wanted him to help build a social networking site. Mark agreed to help, then quietly stepped back from their project and began building his own. The Winklevoss twins would later sue him, alleging he had stolen their idea. The lawsuit would drag on for years, cost millions in settlements, and become a major Hollywood film. Mark was painted by some as a backstabber, a thief of ideas, a socially inept fraud. These were dark days. Days of doubt, accusations, and public scrutiny. Days when the world looked at this quiet, awkward young man in his hoodie and sandals and saw not a visionary, but a problem. The turning point. But here is where the story changes. Here is where the fire gets lit. On February 4th, 2004, a date that would go down in the history of technology, Mark Zuckerberg launched a new website from his Harvard dorm room. He called it the Facebook. He didn't launch it to the world, he launched it only to Harvard students. Within 24 hours, 1,200 students had signed up. Within a month, more than half of Harvard's undergraduate population had a profile. The site spread to Yale, Columbia, Stanford, then to universities across the country. Mark looked at those numbers, and instead of celebrating, he made the decision that would define everything that followed. He dropped out of Harvard. The reaction was predictable. Are you insane? You're at Harvard. You're 20 years old. What are you doing? His father was worried. His professors were puzzled. The conventional world looked at Mark and saw a young man throwing away the greatest educational opportunity in the country on a website. But Mark saw something no one else could see yet. He saw the future. And in the future he saw, the world was connected, not through telephone wires or postal addresses, but through shared identity, shared stories, shared human experience, digitized and amplified across every border, every language, every continent. He packed up and moved to Palo Alto, California, into a small rented house with his co-founders. They worked out of the living room. They slept on air mattresses. They ordered pizza at midnight and wrote code until sunrise. There was no safety net. There was no plan B. There was only the mission. The start of success. In the summer of 2004, investor Peter Thiel, PayPal co-founder and one of Silicon Valley's most celebrated visionaries, wrote Mark Zuckerberg a check for $500,000. It was Facebook's first major investment. What mattered more than the money was the validation. Here was a man who had built and sold companies before Mark could drive, and he believed in this 20-year-old college dropout. Facebook grew at a speed the technology world had never seen. By the end of 2004, 1 million users. By 2006, the site opened to anyone over 13 with an email address. The floodgates opened. By 2007, 50 million users. The world was not just noticing Facebook, the world was joining Facebook. And the offers came pouring in. Yahoo offered $1 billion to buy the company. Mark said no. The board was stunned. Investors were nervous. $1 billion, and a 22-year-old kid was turning it down? Mark was not building a company to sell. He was building a platform to change the world. He sat in boardrooms in his hoodie while executives in tailored suits tried to explain why selling was the smart play. He listened politely. He said no. Then he went back to his desk and kept building. High success and global impact. In 2012, Facebook went public in one of the largest IPOs in American stock market history. The company was valued at over $100 billion. Mark Zuckerberg, at 28 years old, became one of the wealthiest individuals on the planet. But more remarkable than the wealth was the scale of the impact. By 2014, Facebook had 1 billion active daily users, 1 billion people every single day logging in, sharing, connecting. Grandparents watching their grandchildren take their first steps live-streamed from across the world. Activists organizing in real time. Small business owners in Lagos reaching customers they could never have found otherwise. Facebook had become the digital town square of the entire human race. He acquired Instagram in 2012 for $1 billion, mocked at the time, now recognized as perhaps the greatest business acquisition in tech history. He acquired WhatsApp in 2014 for $19 billion. Through these moves and organic growth, the company, later named Meta, became a technology empire unlike anything the world had ever seen. But Mark's ambitions extended far beyond business. In 2015, when his daughter Maxima was born, he and his wife Priscilla Chan wrote her an open letter, read by millions around the world, pledging to give away 99% of their Facebook shares over the course of their lifetimes to the Chan Zuckerberg Initiative, dedicated to advancing education, science, and healthcare for all of humanity. 99% of a fortune worth more than $45 billion. He was 31 years old. The man who had been called a thief, a dropout, a social misfit, and a fraud was giving away the majority of everything he had ever built for the benefit of the world. Lessons and inspiration. So, what do we take from the life of Mark Zuckerberg? First, your weirdness is your greatest asset. Mark was never the most charming person in the room. He was socially awkward, blunt to the point of discomfort, and deeply resistant to being molded into what the world expected. He didn't listen, and the world is different because of it. Second, failure is not the opposite of success. It is the road to it. The face mash disaster, the lawsuits, the ridicule, each one could have ended everything. But Mark understood something most people spend their whole lives trying to learn.